Today on Supernormalized, we have the honor of having Ram X from 40 and Wins podcast. I was listening to his podcast recently, and to be honest, it shook my world in a different sort of way. Now, what I mean by that is Ram has come up with a framework which is a greater understanding and an idea of what I would call supernatural phenomena. And within that framework, he's got UAPs, UFOs, fairies, Bigfoot, Dogman, everything. It all fits nicely into this, but it had some parts that I wanted to talk about, and I said we could pull apart, get some shreds, and get some more understanding on. I reached out to Ram, and he said yes, and so he's on today's show, so you're going to enjoy this one. It's such a deep show. It goes through all the threads of understanding of our reality and comes to a really great conclusion, so stay through all the way to the end and enjoy the show.
I know from the statistics that I have through YouTube and through other podcast apps that a lot of the listeners that I have aren't actually liking or subscribing. So if you could do me a really good favor, like and subscribe because you're on YouTube. And if you're on a podcast app, go and give me 5 stars. That way other people get to hear these great conversations too.
All right. So welcome to Supernormalized, Ram X. Ram, I've been talking to you after listening to your episode on 40 and Wins about your understanding of the UAP UFO phenomenon, which is just like one of the tips, I believe, of the phenomenon itself, and how you explained your understanding of it, which I thought was really crunchy episode. It really blew my mind. I actually listened to it 4 times now. So
thank you so much.
I just wanted to invite you on the show because I wanted to talk about that more and also unpack it more if we could see other angles to it that may not have been seen.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. This is a great podcast. I was really happy that you approached me because this is the perfect place to talk about that idea. And we could just dive right into it because it's so big. And it's one of those ideas that was bigger than me. And I kind of woke up that morning and I approached my lady and I started to talk about it and she just gave me the 1,000-yard stare. And so,
yeah.
So I immediately got my co-host and I said, oh my gosh, before this goes out of my head, we got to talk about it. So that was kind of how it all happened. So I have listened to that episode a few times since then too, and tried to unpack it as well. It was one of those ideas that was just bigger than me. So I'm glad to have someone to talk about it with.
Excellent. So how did you come to that idea? I mean, on the episode, you just say it took you several months or something of thinking about it, but then did something change for you to put it all together?
Yeah, I think that part is really important. And it really began with the New Jersey drone event. And you follow the podcast, you know, we were tracking that really closely. Yeah. And what we found was that there was news reports happening everywhere all the time. And yet the public was just not catching up to it. And it's like, for those of us in the UFO and UAP research field, this was sort of the catastrophic disclosure idea that everyone had thought was going to happen was, oh, if they showed up everywhere all the time, people would acknowledge it. Yeah, that didn't happen, right?
Yeah, right. Well, but then you also have to acknowledge that in many contact experiences, even with like, you know, the odd things like fairies and Bigfoot and everything, when people have those experiences, even as a group, sometimes people, once the event is over, they don't even talk about it because there's something that's sort of like blocked that. I mean, I know when I had my experience with a UFO with my partner at the time, my daughter, it happened. We're in the house is vibrating with energy and all sorts of bizarre stuff's happening. But at the end of it, we just always just went straight to bed and didn't talk about it. And the next day didn't talk about it at all. And the only person I talked to was a friend overseas that I typed something on a chat to. And years later, I was thinking, like, wait a minute, why did that happen that way? I had a high definition camera on my desk and a microphone ready for some weirdness, but I didn't even think to go and pick it up.
No, you don't. I was at a soccer game and my wife she saw a UFO and she actually took a picture of it and I was 10 feet away from her and she never thought once to tell me, who is a UFO researcher, that she was seeing a UFO. It's crazy.
What does that say to you though? It's like, is this so entwined into our reality that because we don't even have those ideations, maybe then we don't have those ideations because we're not meant to. We're not allowed to.
Yes, I think we're diving into it now. So once we realized that people were just not able to acknowledge this phenomenon, it was a huge clue. And it was like, if we just started with that concept, why are people not able to acknowledge this phenomenon? Maybe it would be insightful. And that ended up happening very quickly. And that was the result, is that episode. And that, so when basically the concept is, are UAP and non-human intelligence actually hiding from us, or are we just blind to them? And then, is reality structured in a way that keeps us from perceiving it? And then we sort of unpacked all of that, and we broke it down into what are the pillars of our society, and how do those pillars of society respond to the UFO phenomenon, and how do they reinforce this lack of acknowledgement? And what we found was that these are hidden interactions, and what it begins with our institutions. And so I would break it down there. And just before I get into it, what I didn't do on our episode, which I would like to just say briefly on yours, is it's important to not lose yourself as you start diving so deeply into this phenomenon, and you start to lose the touch points to your reality. It's important to just hold on to all of those things that make you, you, and your relationships, and remember that this is the UFO phenomenon. It's almost a separate reality from our own. So to unpack those different institutions, we have science, we have religion, we have pop culture and our media, and then we have government. And each one of those different institutions has systematic control mechanisms to prevent UFO information from coming out. And we could just start with science, since that's the big one that we're all hoping to have us, that we're all hoping will tell us the answers to the phenomenon. Then science is not designed to study UAP, it's designed to reject them. And what I mean by that is that science is built on a system of reductionism and repeatability. And we are a science podcast. I am a science researcher. I have become a citizen scientist through this research. And so I love science. It is basically my religion. But I understand that it is a religion. And it has its own dogma.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it requires these controlled experiments, which UAP are capable of preventing because they're intelligent. So science is not built to study something that's smarter than us. It's non-repeatable, and they also appear to be perceived differently by different people. And that prevents us from getting consistent observational patterns. So if we both saw a UFO and you saw a saucer and I saw a cigar-shaped craft, and then we went to the police and reported it, they would tell us we're both crazy.
Yeah.
And any scientist seriously studying that and saying, well, these two guys don't seem to be crazy, and they're both saying the same thing, and maybe I even measured some weird electromagnetic frequencies at the same time, would be completely ostracized. He would say, you're feeding into the crazies. The academic community will not support that. And it's a space where we are not allowed to question in science. So if UAP aren't repeatable, they aren't real under scientific doctrine. Now, that also prevents science from finding ways to make UAPs repeatable. And we know that there is a breakaway section of the scientific community that has found ways to attract UAPs and do things like that. But it's a completely separate segment from the rest of mainstream and academia, where we could maybe be taking those insights and turning them into functional things that will help us in our lives. And then we would go into religion, and UAP would rewrite theology. So every major religion has already defined the supernatural. They've already defined the otherworldly, and they've given you methods on how to deal with it. and how to respond to it. So one thing I can tell you about the UAP phenomenon, and I think everyone who looks into it seriously will find this, is that the beings show up differently for different people. Sometimes they're aliens, sometimes they're more like religious apparitions, sometimes they're things from folklore, sometimes they look like something a 5-year-old drew if you asked him to draw an interdimensional being. So they appear differently in different cultures, but they appear within the cultural framework. So let me give you an example of that. If I'm an atheist or an agnostic in the US, I am far more likely, or in South America or in Europe, I am far more likely to, or Australia, to see a biblical apparition if it's going to show up, a Christian biblical apparition, if it's going to show up in that way.
Yeah.
If I'm in the Middle East, I'm far more likely to see a jinn. If I'm in India, I'm far more likely to see Ganesh or a Vimana. So it fits into the dominant culture, even if you don't have specific beliefs to your individual self. So if I don't have a religious belief for it to parrot, it will use the one that I'm most familiar with. And if all of this were to come out, most religions say our way is the only way, and it would rewrite that portion of their theology. And that's very unmooring to people. It's very, for people who aren't religious or who haven't taken that step, and you're not familiar with the numbers on how many people are religious, I think they underestimate how disruptive that will be, and therefore they underestimate why the government would hold it back for that reason.
Okay.
And then we have academia, which would be the third pillar. You know, there's science, which is part of academia, but academia itself is also preventing disclosure because of things like history and all the anomalies in history that are very popular subjects within the UFO and UAP phenomenon. We have, Egypt, megalithic structures. There's a lot of evidence that ancient builders were way more advanced than they should have been. And I think we could even get conventional historians to agree with that, but they won't question it. And so universities are designed to protect existing knowledge. They're not designed to explore disruptive ideas. Carl Jung and John Mack were very disruptive, and they were both ostracized and stigmatized by their peers. Universities are funded by institutions that have no interest in disrupting reality models that fund them. Ancient knowledge of UAP is labeled as myth, even when it's consistent across cultures, like cave paintings and religious texts. It's just labeled as myth. There's never a thought of, well, did they actually see something and then extrapolated all of this stuff from it? So then academia has the moving goalposts of proof. Back before the Tic Tac and the 2017 UAP encounters, the big thing was, we don't have good video. We don't have good instrumentation. We got all of that from that 2017 encounter, and there's been plenty that has come out since. None of that has moved the goalpost. There's a great clip of a gentleman goes by the name of Prophet Yahweh online. You can find it on YouTube. And he summons, you've seen it?
Yeah, it is great.
You want to describe it for the audience?
Well, the guy is able to, on cue, call a UFO at any time he wants. He just prays for a moment, looks up, and they're there. And anyone that's with him gets to see it. So what is going on there? Is he actually calling a UFO, or is something else happening?
Yeah, and he did this 20 years ago before any of this psionic stuff was introduced into the conversation in a big way.
Yeah.
Before anyone really believed in UFOs, they chose the date, time,
yeah.
and location, right?
Live TV.
On live TV, yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, it's wild.
And he's been doing it for 20 years since. So we are all now at this point in the UFO field or UFO community getting excited about Jake Barber and saying, well, maybe Jake Barber will summon a UFO and that will change this conversation. I wouldn't expect that because Prophet Yahweh already did it. And there's a bunch of people who can do this today.
Yeah, Chris Bledsoe.
Yeah. And there's a lot of experiences who are like you, where they would never think to even come out after their experience and tell anyone about it.
Yeah.
And then there's government and power, which is obviously the big one. And this goes into the big question that I think everyone seems to have around the UFO field. Why won't the government tell us? What is the big secret? That's what I often see in forums. And it's all right here because government relies on all of those institutions in order to maintain control and stability for all of us. And they have obviously terrible concerns about ripping away your religion and what you think about reality all at once, and then expecting society to just go on as it would or should. And in the community, I see a lot of reactions to that. And most people say, I think people will be okay. Over time, it's going to take a minute to get there. There will be some people who will absolutely lose it, but I think we'll be okay if they just came out and told us all of this. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they will be okay. And in fact, I think we're actually on the paradigm shift right now. And as a part of that, these massive exposures of UAPs to people are a part of that story. And your discussion of this itself, I think, is actually one of those touch points for that change. And I believe that because back in 97, I had a contact experience using psychedelics at the time where I became in contact with the beings on the other side regularly, and I was doing it as a ritual sort of thing for myself. And first of all, it was just an experiment to see what would happen after listening to good old Terence McKenna. And then as time went on, I was like, wait a minute, because I was like a staunch materialist at the time. After a while, I was thinking, wait a minute, these things could be real. I'm not just having, hallucinations. These are actually experiences of beings because, one, they're consistent, and two, they're telling me things that actually are true that are happening in this reality. And then the third part of it was they wanted to show me that they weren't just something I was dreaming. They wanted to make sure that this isn't just like material patterns in the brain which are just showing up. And they did that one time when I was experimenting with them because I had this stupid belief that they were coming from far away. It just felt like that.
Sure. Everyone, that's still 90% of people out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thought that. And they said, look, we're going to prove that we don't come from far away. And I said, okay. So at the right time, which I don't know what that was, but they knew, and they said, come on in. And I joined in with them at that time. And when they did, they just said, keep your eyes open. And the whole world that I was sitting in the room I was sitting in, morphed into all of those beings that I could see on the other side into this reality, and everything was made of them, even my arms, my hands. And I was looking at myself going, my God, I'm made of these things.
My God.
And it was so shocking. And they said, yeah, we're here all the time. We create all of your reality. Stop worrying about things. We know what we're doing. It's like, oh, okay.
That's so consistent. That's so interesting because that is so consistent.
Yeah.
Like I was just reading a summary from a leader of an experiencer group yesterday who was just saying like it was so consistent. And yeah, that's exactly their attitude. They're like, yes. And there's a physicist in the public today, Donald Hoffman, who is fantastic. He's actually a cognitive neuroscientist who's dealing with this idea of perception, and he has a ton of mathematical proofs that we live in a type of a simulation.
Yeah.
And that's what we're always describing. And if we took a step back from folklore in the Bible, I mean, isn't that what it's describing? Mm-hmm. It's describing a type of a simulation, or maybe more the Gnostic traditions based on your experience. But they're all describing something it's created, and then if you viewed God as the programmer, this is how I like to break it out because it removes the dogma for me, is you look at the God as creator as the programmer, and then you have us as sort of the end users, and then in between you have agents.
And those
that's-
agents appear in all sorts of different forms, and like, you've described in several of your episodes on 14 Winds, how a lot of it seems like contact with plasma shaping itself to
Yes.
a definition. Now, that's what I was getting with these beings too. They basically said, we create everything, we make everything, and we do it in co-creation with you.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, that's interesting in itself. And over time, as I was working with them, we got to a certain point and they said, okay, look, we've shown you everything. Don't come back in here.
Interesting.
Said, okay.
So have you looked into the Kozarev mirrors experience at all?
Yes, that's wild.
So that's what the beings told those people when they went in, like the psi-capable people. Yeah. They said that,
yeah,
when the psi-capable people went in, the ones that were able to deal with the amount of anxiety that they were getting, because like they brought in these heavy-duty, medium remote viewer people, and they were all getting this immediate anxiety and buzzing, and they said, I can't stay in here. But the ones that were able to stay in for a while said that beings morphed all around them and told them to get the hell out of here. You have no business being in here.
Yeah. I actually had that with sometimes I went into the space at the wrong time and they said, no, there's something happening here. Not now, come back later, not now. And they literally pushed me out. And I was like, what's going on here? But I got a glimpse of like a war happening on the other side. I'm like, what's going on there? But
that is what it feels like. Now, did you get the feeling that these beings that you were interacting with were individually intelligent?
Absolutely. And I'd also known them for infinity, for all time.
Interesting.
When I first was introduced to them by dropping in on them, it was like a party. They were like, oh my God, you made it finally. It's about time.
Yes.
We've been waiting for you every time.
So I find this part really important for us to try to figure out. And I feel like it's where we are right now with the phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
I'm in your camp. I think that we're dealing with individual intelligences, but they do operate by a framework. They do operate according to some sort of guidelines. I wouldn't call them rules because they can break them, but they do operate according to guidelines, the good ones and the bad ones and the neutral ones, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's throwing us off. If you remove the dogma, you can see that. You're like, whoa, they're all operating on some sort of framework. There appears to be a hierarchy. There also appears to be levels of intelligence between the beings.
Oh,
Some
absolutely.
of them, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's right.
Tell me about
That's right.
that.
Well, I mean, from my own experience of working with spirits, there's different types of spirits. And I would see those as the beings themselves. Those different types of beings have different rules and different configurations. And I call it my spirit team. My spirit team itself were all at certain sort of level. But when I first got inside the space, the first time I went there, they said to me, you've got to talk to the communication protocol being. And I said, what's that? And then a mantis turned up and then put its face towards mine and we started interacting, and it changed my mind about how I was communicating, and all of a sudden I could communicate better in their space. Things made more sense, and I don't know why that worked that way, but that's the way it worked. So there is different levels of beings that have different powers, they have different rules, responsibilities, and like you said, they do have sort of like, you could say, unknown, unwritten contracts that they have to abide by in certain ways. But like you did say also too, there is different levels of beings, there's different types of beings, and they do break the rules occasionally. And I think a part of those breaking of the rules are those reaching through from the other side into our reality of things like the UAP phenomenon, fairies.
Right.
They all have their own existence. They have their own experience of time and space. And like you said, it's probably more than likely it's outside of time.
It is,
and yeah, which is why they can appear at different stages through your life looking exactly the same, because they're timeless themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So
I wonder about that a lot. They're capable of being independent of time. So
yes.
I guess they would have the option to live linearly. I mean, they must be experiencing linear time and able to communicate with us. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm stuck on that one. That's an interesting question, I think.
Yeah. I'm not sure what time they experience, but it could be a parallel time which intersects.
It's possible that, and when people are remote viewing and astral projecting, they're often talking about seeing different timelines.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we've had those contact experiences that even Jacques Vallée has put into his books of seemingly extraterrestrials turning up and saying, what time frame are you in?
Yeah, what time is this? And you wonder if that's part of their, shtick, because they do like to put on certain airs and play different roles, play the leprechaun at times or whatever.
That's it. I have somebody on Twitter put up a post that said, why do they all look different? I said, because they have a sense of humor.
They do, yeah.
It's playful.
Now, one of the things that I found disturbing and that we focused on, because we thought, well, this might be something we could actually stop or give people the option to stop, is negative entity hauntings or malevolent hauntings or demonic hauntings. And they do happen. It is a small percentage of cases.
Yeah.
But they do happen. And I can't imagine how terrible that is. But something we found that I just thought was interesting lately that might be insightful is that negative entity hauntings typically seem to happen after trauma, and especially trauma that was brought on by like a terribly abusive or torturous situation. And people in those situations describe a feeling of disassociation, being out of body.
Yeah, right.
And this is often a precursor for contact, is an out-of-body type experience or consistent remote viewing, an intense remote viewing experience. It seems like they can see you at that point. So I think what's happening there, I think this might help people, is that you're becoming disassociated and you're having that out-of-body experience and you're extremely vulnerable and it's imprinting you with this horrible experience. And then the things that are attracted to you in that moment, if you just got really unlucky, are the really bad ones.
Yeah, and then they literally drink your experience and drink your life and then experience things through your life that they enjoy.
And they can even harm people around you physically. That has.
They definitely can. And in fact, they can. I've seen them operate people around me to match up to the frequency I was resonating.
Oh, gosh.
So if you're in a bad frame of mind, then people start fighting around you. So you've got to watch out for that too, because it seems like you radiate that energy and then it gets picked up into other people's stories.
Interesting. That seems like something we could start to understand better.
I think so. Yeah.
Putting something like that into scientific terms seems impossible, but understand better, we could.
Well, it means we have to understand, first of all, that if we're going to say that a part of phenomenon looks like spirits, and spirits can be sometimes positive and negative. So if they are, then those negative ones may have an agenda. And then if they do have an agenda, how do you stop that agenda? And, I think our society right now is actually experiencing that. I mean, look at all of our media, our movies and everything. It's all a reflection of that sort of trauma-based patterning. You'll see pretty much anything you can turn on any of the streaming services. You put it on within the first 5 minutes, somebody's being killed graphically in front of you. It's like, in what world is that even normal? You know what I mean? Yeah. That's just not normal at all. But that's what's popular because these beings that actually have a bit of a negative sort of agenda are getting a hold of people and producing this content. So we need to actually figure that out as well, because I think, divorcing ourselves from that negative agenda can actually assist us in growing in a more positive way.
Yeah, I think that was the only pillar we didn't talk about yet was Hollywood, and that's a good one. When I mentioned that on the show and I said, how does the phenomenon manipulate us through Hollywood? It was because of the images of all of this stuff, right? Yep. Aliens, Independence Day, E.T. And I think people dismiss that and think, oh, well, you're saying that there's a big conspiracy and that the writers and producers of Hollywood are all gathering and the NHI are telling them what to say. And that's not at all how it works. That's not at all what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe you can help me. Yeah.
I don't think that they consciously aggregate. If anything, when people become possessed, I've actually been possessed, I'll admit that, because I was possessed once because of a situation where I was involved with a bad shaman and some weird things happened, and I became possessed at that time. I want to know more
about that later.
Okay, and there's a part of that story. I had beings which were instilled upon me, and they had influence upon me at that time. And now, thankfully, I actually held my focus of my own conscious mind and my own self-identity and I could see that this other stuff was being dropped in. And these were ideas which were negative about myself and my way in the world, and even suggested that I'd been evil in the past in different sorts of ways. And none of it was true. It was just that the objective was to make me go into a state of continuous and almost horrible fear. And it forced me to actually focus on what they were doing to me and separate myself from that. And over time, I figured out a way to break away from that story and how it was being told to me, and push those beings out of my system.
So it was trying to change your self-perception.
Possession definitely does change your self-perception, and a lot of possession is completely unconscious. I would say that too.
Totally. Was it focused on changing your self-perception, do you think? Or was it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was hell-bent on hurting me, whatever that was.
Through that mechanism.
Yeah.
By affecting your self-perception. I think that's really informative for people. I think.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in that state, it felt like you said, with the people of the cozy red sort of mirrored that buzz. Felt like that buzz continuously, but it was emanating from the center of my head, which is odd. Ooh. And it sounded like a metallic sort of tone, and I felt it in my head and down my spine, and it basically made me feel like I was high all the time. It gave me extra powers. I could actually hear at a distance, and I had intuition, which was off the charts.
Yes.
And so there was little bonuses that went along with that, but the bonuses were outweighed by the terror it put me in often. And getting control of that terror actually helped to start push it out. And over time, I got it out of my system. It took about 3 months.
And you did this yourself?
Well, I could say myself, but to be honest, I actually had another spirit come along and said, look, we can see what's going on with you. We want to kick it out, and this is what's going to happen. And they recommended I moved out of that house I was in, moved to another house, and another spirit came along and said, okay, this is what we need to do, and took me on a practice that took about 3 months of work to get it out.
And are you clairaudient?
Yeah. Yes.
So you're hearing directly?
Yeah, I hear directly. I sometimes have visions, and sometimes intuitive things pop in, and I would say I'm psychic as well. But these are all things I think as normal. I grew up pretty much turned on from a very young age. At the age of 4, I used to literally, as a toddler, cross the road of a house into a forest and sit with beings that I thought were my friends. And they taught me how to meditate at the age of 4. So I don't know what that was about, but it seemed to colour my whole life.
And did you tell people about those beings when you were young?
I did. They didn't believe me. No one believed me. Yeah, no, my parents were very normal sort of people.
And how did that affect you growing up?
I discovered quickly that I had to shut that down. I had to not talk about a lot of this stuff because it would get you that 100-yard stare you talked about.
Yeah.
Or that's different, and I know he's the weirdo,
Now, do you come from a family of experiencers?
I'm adopted, so I can't say.
Okay.
Yeah. My original parents were Russian and English, and I was adopted out at the age of 28 days to Australian parents and grew up under their wings.
Do you know your original surname?
Original surnames? Yes, I do. It's actually Seraphim. Yeah, I know.
I think you're intergenerational.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I was about to test that for because I actually have some ways maybe I could look at it. There's no point. Yeah, I think you're intergenerational.
Yeah. Yeah, my Russian father apparently ran from the Bolsheviks in the Second World War and ended up in Australia. So, and he came from a noble family apparently, but I don't know what that means exactly. But because there's no history.
So that must have been hard for you, because if you had people around you who had already experienced it, they can kind of guide you, and that does seem to happen if you talk to experiencers who had parents who said, okay, this is how you deal with it. Yeah.
Well, that's true. I actually grew up pretty much gravitating towards people that had experiences as well. It seems like you sort of were magnetically drawn towards each other anyway. And again, like I said, I pretty much learned how to shut that down and for a while there as a teenager, it was such a different othering sort of feeling. I felt like I didn't want to be here because I couldn't relate to people. But grew out of that, realized it's good to be a weirdo. And part of the reason why I do this podcast is so I can talk about these things.
Weirdos unite. I love it. Yeah, I that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing all that. It's very important that people share because you know that this is real. And I would say a good portion of your audience probably does too. But there's a portion of the audience that thinks, is this really real? And I can understand that. That's how I started. But it's important that people understand that it's real because there are kids like you out there who are experiencing this and they need to be heard and not shuffled off into being called delusional or schizophrenic or something like that. Those things happen and they need people, everyone needs to be psychologically tested in the way that they normally would. But then when the tests come back clean, it's not unprecedented.
That's it.
That's what people have to understand. This has been going on for thousands of years. Your experience is not unprecedented. You're about 3 to 5% of the population.
Yeah.
In America alone, that's 12 million people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we really, it took forever to get, not to compare contact to possession, because possession is a form of contact, just a subset, but it took forever to get possession added to the DSM to be considered a real mental health condition. And now it is.
Well, that's a good thing because seriously, people need to know that these things actually happen to people.
Right.
So you can't just deny it when it's actually happening.
Yeah. And it took 100 years for materialist science to go, okay, there's something here that we don't understand. And maybe we should acknowledge it for the benefit of the patient. If for no other reason, right?
Yeah.
Let go of your dogma for a minute just to help the patient.
Yeah. So looking at the dogmatic firewall, would you say that that dogmatic firewall is inherently personal for each individual?
And it is and it isn't. And that's where it gets tough because we could compare it to the way that the beings, and I would use as proof of that, the way the beings respond.
Yes.
So the way that the beings respond to it, I think it's a matter of precedence. I again look at it like computers, and I really think we're looking at a system. So if you have individual preferences, you're more into aliens, you're more afraid of demons, you're more into angels, and then whatever it wants to do. Because as you and I have discussed, we're both of the mind that these are individual entities. And that's a huge problem with us trying to standardize this phenomenon. We're individuals, they're individuals, and then we end up having a co-created experience. Because they had an agenda for us. They read our intent. They read our beliefs. And then what I like to call UAP are, after that episode, we've changed our definition of 14 Winds. What we refer to UAP as are adaptive expressions of an unknown intelligence.
I like that. Yeah.
That could take the form of physical craft. That could take the form of an ethereal entity. It goes that big of a range, but they are adaptive. If we removed all of their nonsense with the dogma, they are adaptive expressions of an unknown intelligence. And then that allows us to look at the purpose of that expression. And it allows us to look at it more as a message or a symbol. And the message may not always be good. And it may not always be something that we want to hear, or it may not even be something we want to take forward in our life. But we need to start understanding the messages. We need to understand the words that they're using.
And also step on beyond the common tropes that seem to be dropped by some of them, like save the planet, everything's going to explode.
Oh, gosh. They're big on that right now, right? I mean, they keep saying 2026 or 2027. And I don't know why they don't know the year.
Well, it seems to align astrologically as well. I mean, in astrology, there's a lot of hot points over the next, even from now onwards until 2029. it seems to be a hot mess of planets influencing each other and causing a lot of drama, and also opening our minds to new ways of thinking. So I think that's all part of that story.
If I were feeding into it, there is some alignments around 2027 from the occult. You know, we did a bunch of occult research recently where we went and took grimoire, which are, you know, ancient spell books, dating all the way back from Egyptian times to now. Because there's a massive overlap that we've been studying lately, which is more just interesting than anything, is the connection between UAP and the occult.
Yeah.
And we know that contact has been happening now for thousands of years, and we know that it's not dependent on our machines. So the occult seemed like a logical place to look. We took a bunch of grimoire and fed them into AI and then said, can we find consistent patterns with the technology? Assume that there's a technology here, and let's work with the machine to see if we can find consistent patterns. And celestial timing is the big one, along with chanting and sigils.
Basically opening their keys to a door to open something.
Yeah, like a window. That's what Keel used to call it, windows.
Well, the popular word now, portal.
Sure, that'll work. Perhaps more appropriate. Yeah. That's interesting. And then there's portal areas. So Keel had brought on, oh, well, it's a window area, but then not everyone who goes to Skinwalker Ranch, for example, which is a window area, would have an experience. Now, if you were to spend a week there, I would bet $1,000 you would have an experience.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
But maybe not 70% of the population.
Does that mean that it's in my written history or story that I'm living in time, or I resonate in a different sort of way that is open to that? I don't know.
So given the fact that you're a lifelong experiencer, I would, again, bet dollars to donuts that you are genetically predisposed. So your antenna is a little more attuned than the rest of us. And that's why you're a lifelong experiencer. There are cases, and I'm one of them, that you can turn yourself into an experiencer by focusing your attention maybe too much on this phenomenon. And then it can happen subconsciously or unconsciously. Okay. There are protocols in the public today. They're not protocols, actually. There are protocols that work, like CE5 works some of the time. But you should be mindful of all the things that CJ just said about contact with these entities and being aware of their intentions. That said, there's technology now, just over the last 2 years, where you can simulate being a clairaudient.
Simulate?
Well, you can do it. I mean, you can ask the question, and then you can use a device to receive the answer the way you're getting clairaudience.
Oh, you mean like a spirit box sort of devices?
Like a spirit box, but much more refined now. Yeah.
Oh, wow, cool. Okay. I'd like to know more about those.
I'll tell you off camera. I think it's out there, and people get pissed when I do that, but it's out there and you'll find it if you want it. I told you it's there. I am not going to go around promoting that because of all the reasons we just said, and I'm not even going to apologize for that.
Rightly so. So one of the things I was pointing out is that maybe it does look a lot like a Gnostic sort of dualistic universe in experience. And the one thing I've noticed about the understanding of the Gnosticism sort of path is that it seems to make the world into like a prison that's awful and everything. I don't actually see it that way because nearly all of my contact experiences have been amazing and good. I've only had one possession that was really horrible. Other ones have been good.
I love that you're saying this right now because I knew you were the perfect person for me. I told you, I hardly ever say yes to other podcasts. And I'm like, you're going to say what I want to say. You just said it.
Well, I've had positive experiences. I'll say that for sure. And not all UAP experiences are awful, as we've seen lately with the beat flap. Some people are just amazed and it's actually uplifting them and changing their experience of the world. Now, my wife, she's never had an experience until I think it was last November. and we were just talking about how ordinary they are. And I said, let's just go out and look at satellites tonight. And we were just standing on the deck and just looking out, and I'm showing her how to find satellites and point them out. And she points one out and she says, look, that one. And I said, yeah, that's cool. That's a bit brighter. And then it does an arc in the sky, which is impossible, over the top of our house. And I went, that's definitely not what it's going to settle. So that was it. I said, yeah, that was it. And she said, that was really ordinary. I said, yeah, most of the experiences really are.
Yeah, they're super fleeting.
Yeah.
Like 10, 12 seconds. They're like, did you get a picture? Would an orange dot in the sky have convinced you? There's no point in getting a picture. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, that's really wild. So what you said about this being the Gnostic idea, and the big one right now is reptile soul prison. I hear that one. Look, if this is a simulation, it's a beautiful simulation, and I'd like to thank the programmer.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm really enjoying life. Life is a good thing, and I'm here to experience everything. I think we all punched a ticket to actually experience this life, and after reading the travel brochure, and it's going to be a good life. It's going to be very interesting. We chose probably one of the most interesting times in history. It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds from over the next few years. I'm certain it's going to be exciting, and we are co-creating it. Just realize that part of it, everyone. So maybe just everyone, we could imagine peace together. Just imagine peace.
Let's try to focus on what's positive.
Yeah.
Like that, like you say, that's the way out of the soul prison.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thinking back to the contact experience with Betty and Barney, Betty had a positive experience and Barney was a bit terrified.
Good point.
And I think that's how it is with these experiences. It's like if you come at it with a framework of it being nefarious and ugly, it'll be that way.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So focus on the positive. It's where we're going.
Absolutely. It's a quantum universe is the way I would look at it, because my religion is science. And the way quantum mechanics work is what you attenuate your attention on is what manifests. Schrodinger's cat, right?
Yep. Pure co-creation. Pure co-creation. Mm. Well, I'm just thinking, is there any other questions I had for you? I'm just having a little flick through here.
The end of this, what are UAP without dogma is kind of interesting. If you want to,
yeah. So what are UAP without dogma? Let's go with that.
Well, without dogma, we broke it down, and the way we did this again was to upload all of our website, our data into the machine, and then we said, remove the dogma. And then we went at it again as humans and made sure that it was completely bare bones technical. So when we did that, this is what we saw UAP as. UAP are not craft in the way we understand them. As I said, they're adaptive expressions of an unknown intelligence. That's the first and most important thing. But they're not bound by physical location, as you noted. So they exist inside and outside of perception simultaneously. They're both real and not real. How are we going to get science to understand that? UAP may not be extraterrestrial or crypto-terrestrial or our basic ideas of interdimensional, but rather something entirely different, because we're humans and we can't see beyond that. But I would say I can officially sign off on interdimensional finally, because even in this podcast, I think we've just noted that there's 3 dimensions in our world, right? Basically length, width, and height. The 4th dimension, by most scientists' estimation, would be time. So if they can go outside of time, we've already established that they're interdimensional.
Yes.
If they have a vacation home in the Florida Keys, well, that's just what they do on vacation. They're interdimensional. UAP interactions, as we just noted, are partially constructed by human expectations. So like when we talked about the way that biblical apparitions are more likely to happen around Christian countries, they also get the worst negative entities I have ever read. Those tend to happen in Western countries. The really bad possession cases, the ones where they're like guttural, saying, demonic things and stuff. I like Middle East, maybe, but mostly Western countries. And there's an epidemic of that happening in South America because all these kids are messing with Ouija boards. And then the more kids that were getting possessed and going to the hospital with real problems, the more kids were messing with Ouija boards.
Oh, God.
Those are Catholic countries. They're getting the worst negative entities.
How curious.
It's good to know, yeah. So UAP also manipulate time itself. We have to assume that they can because they're outside of time. And that could be crazy making, because that could make you think that they can mess with history, and we can't trust history. So like you and I said at the beginning of the podcast, we just can't look at it that way. We have to be able to acknowledge it and still live in a shared reality that we can all coexist in. And UAP, finally, this is, I think, the most important thing for those people who are really looking for answers in this. UAP are not here to disclose themselves. They've made that very clear. And through contact with people like CJ, had told him directly, they are not here to disclose themselves and expose the rules of the game. They function as an intelligence that interacts with us on shifting and unpredictable terms. So we should not expect that.
So from here,
sorry, go ahead.
So from here, we should talk about expanding perception and how to actually interact with these beings in some sort of way. And one of the things you actually noted was how can you shift your perception without losing yourself? I think that you can do that, and you can do that by actually keeping yourself centered throughout whatever experience you're going through. I mean, that's a key thing. I mean, one of the things they do with lucid dreaming is they get you to write a C on your hand to check that you're conscious by looking at it. So if you can actually make sure that you keep yourself conscious during your experiences, that way you don't lose yourself. But I'm not so sure that you can lose yourself at all, because I did a lot of research into NDEs myself, just doing deep dives on YouTube and for many, many, many hours. And it's like no matter what happens, yourself, the kernel of yourself will still be there and is able to perceive and receive information and maybe even still co-create.
I like that attitude. I'd like to believe that's true. And I think it's true for most of us, or some of us. I'm not in everyone's head. But I think people who, especially when you have materialist or religious dogmatic beliefs, there's a fear. There's a fear of letting go. You had something that was telling you everything was okay. And there's a fear of not having that anymore. And losing yourself. And I actually, when I go about saying that religion is this dogmatic control structure, I would also like to say, if you were in the pew on Sunday, I hope you're in the pew next Sunday. That's what I mean by not losing yourself too. I think, right? I think there's a way for you to maintain who you are, your religion, I have to do this with science, maintain my attitudes towards science, even though now I understand that I'm looking at sort of a rigged game, But I think we need to be able to research this phenomenon without fear of losing those things that we have taken in as part of our identity. Those things will change over time and with our own wisdom and awareness. We don't have to figure out, well, if these beings exist, how does that make my religion? It doesn't. It doesn't matter. Your religion is still your religion. And you can put God above whatever these beings are. That still works. It still works against the evidence. But I think what you can't do is say, my religion is the only way and everyone else's is wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's key. Absolutely key. And I think that's actually also a really great point to end the podcast for today. So, Ram, that was fantastic. What a great talk. And I'd love to talk to you again in the future.
Absolutely. This was wonderful. Yeah.
So how can people find you and your podcast?
Well, pretty easy. Just 14wins.com or just Google 14wins. We are also on Facebook and YouTube. Just started putting up some YouTube videos. They're kind of fun and 14. So, yeah, we respond there.
Excellent. All right, then. So I'll just say goodbye to listeners. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me. Take care, y'all.
Right. Wow. what an episode. That was so cool. I'm really happy that Ram said yes to coming on the show. And what we went over there was really cool and deep in new sort of ways, as you could hear. And he's excited about it. I'm excited about it. And he's invited me to come on his show as well. So I'll let everyone know about that when that happens. But it was very good to talk about these experiences and these understandings from different angles. Like we're all, touching the elephant from different ways to get an understanding of what the elephant is. And I think that this show will help a lot of people get their own understanding of what all this is really about. So if you've enjoyed today's show, remember to like and subscribe. It's free. And also, if you are on a podcast app and you really enjoyed the show, share it to one person. I'm sure there's other people out there, that really enjoy this stuff. And also, please give me 5 stars. Write something nice. That'd be really cool. So thank you so much for listening. Until the next episode, it's bye for now.